So first of all, the 16 Bodhisattva Precepts. I have this little plaque here that sits in my room right by my door, and I don't always glance at it when I walk into the Abbey from my room, but sometimes I do. Sometimes I pause in front of it and just kind of gaze at it. And so in the 16 Bodhisattva Precepts, we have the three treasures. So taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Then we have the three pure precepts, which are cease from doing evil, practice good, and then practice good for others. And then we have the 10 grave precepts. So not killing, not stealing, not misusing sexuality, not lying, not intoxicating or clouding the mind. And let's see. And then we have some that are on right speech. So not speaking about others' errors and faults, not talking negatively about the three treasures, not elevating oneself and putting others down. And then we have one about generosity, so not being stingy or withholding. And then we have this one about actualizing harmony, and it says, do not be angry, and I've never really appreciated that translation, but not harboring hatred or ill will towards others, having a mind of, an intention of nonviolence. So part of this question relates to form and emptiness, as well as Zen being a mystical religion or a mystical spiritual practice. And so I have a definition of mysticism here that I think can be helpful. So Merriam-Webster says that mysticism is the experience of mystical union or direct communion with ultimate reality. It is the belief that direct knowledge of God, spiritual truth, or ultimate reality can be attained through subjective experience. And so when we're talking about mysticism, there is this distinction between the esoteric practices of spirituality and the exoteric practice of spirituality. The exoteric means the practices like studying sutras. And so there are, a number of koans and old stories in Zen Buddhism about this, and I'll get to that in a moment, about how studying the sutras is not the path of Zen, or just studying the sutras. It can be, some people might consider metta prayer as an exoteric practice. Some people might consider certain forms of common prayer, outside of Buddhism or, across religions as exoteric, depending on how that prayer is done. And then the esoteric practices are the unifying practices. In yoga, there's various forms of meditation, but even in the practice of asana yoga, just following the breath while doing the postures is a mystical practice. If someone is doing the yoga postures and all they're doing is thinking about, okay, am I doing it right? How does this look in the mirror? Then that's not necessarily an esoteric practice. So the intention behind mysticism, the intention behind esoteric spirituality is this direct realization of true nature, this direct dropping of the dualistic mind and becoming unified with true reality, whatever name that goes by, and ultimately has no name. So if we are in our practice, as many, those of you who are practicing koans, you get this repetition of drop everything you know, forget every concept, forget every idea of who you are, what you are, why you are, drop that over and over again. The same thing happens on the meditation cushion in Zazen and Shikantaza. We're just dropping our concepts, our thinking, our thoughts over and over and over and over again and coming back to some direct experience of this present moment. Whether it's a concentrated practice on sounds or breath or mu or something like that, or it's an open awareness practice that allows all the sensations to be experienced equally. So in that, I have found it being confusing at times. So if I'm just dropping all these thoughts, dropping all the concepts, it seems like the precepts can be very conceptual at times, and they can be this overlay of a set of rules or guidelines or laws that I'm trying to put on myself, when really what I'm trying to do is drop myself and come into complete full acceptance of who I am, what I am, without any judgment. So that to me is where the conflict has come up at times. So wait, am I supposed to drop everything? Am I supposed to try to actually be something? Am I supposed to be acting in a certain way? Or am I supposed to just be letting go and letting authenticity freely flow? And so maybe you can relate to that conundrum, that conflict. And that to me has been the koan, and it is the koan of the precepts. So that's where I'd like to talk about how the precepts can actually be an esoteric practice. They can also be an exoteric practice. So I lived in South Korea for 6 months one time, and so I learned what it was like to live in a country that was largely Buddhist. And I realized that, actually most Buddhists, which there are 535 million Buddhists in the world, 8 to 10% of the world's population is Buddhist. Most of these people, and I don't know the exact percentage, do not actually meditate. They practice the precepts. They accumulate merit for good karma to have a better rebirth. They do prayers. They do prostrations. They do acts of kindness, acts of generosity. They do mantras and bring mantras. Now, and actually what I would like to say is that I think all of those can be esoteric practices, and all of those can be exoteric practices, as well as studying the sutras and reading books about Buddhism and reading books about spirituality. All of those can be esoteric or exoteric depending on the intention with which they're undertaken. So, for example, in Christian mysticism, there's Lectio Divina, which is divine reading. And in divine reading, it's much like koan practice, where you open, you're reading through the Bible, and you read a section and then you pause when something hits, when you feel some kind of little surge in the body or in the mind. You pause, you close the eyes, and you just sit there and feel, or you look out the window, or look at the wall, and just ponder, contemplate, feel what just happened, and how that reading relates to our experience. And so that to me is a mystical practice. But just reading through and trying to memorize and trying to gain knowledge so that when I go into a debate with someone, I can win, that's an exoteric practice of spirituality and Buddhism. So similarly, the act of generosity, giving a donation. If I give a donation out of some sense of like, okay, if I do this donation, I'll get a better rebirth in my next life, or my teacher will like me, or things like that. That would be an exoteric practice of spirituality, possibly. An esoteric version of that would be really feeling, what is the right donation? What is right for me in my life? What can I afford? And why am I doing this? What is the purpose of my act of generosity here? Is there something I'm trying to get back from that, out of it? Is this really an act of like, oh wow, I really am appreciative and grateful for what I'm getting, from my teacher and from the Sangha? and I really just want to share. I want to continue, the practice of Buddhism and make that available for people in the future. So that to me would be where the esoteric aspect of generosity would show up. So in our practice, this experience of emptiness, and sometimes it's like, okay, Kensho and Satori, it's this one time like boom, but actually this experience of emptiness is something that we're tapping into, this practice realization, this realization of our Buddha nature every time that we sit down on the cushion and sit, if we are actually meditating when we're on the cushion. And little bit by little bit, we are experiencing that emptiness more and more and more over time. And in that emptiness, or in this practice, in this evolution of our practice, we go through different stages. Like there's the 10 ox herding pictures, and we might go through those in cycles. And the ox herding picture with the circle is just pure emptiness. And in that place, there can be this sense of there's no me, there's no precepts, there's no Buddhism. I don't want to read anything. I don't want to talk about Buddhism. I don't want to even talk to people. I just want to sink into emptiness and sit down and just be. And in that place, it can be, and our teachers really drive us to experience that place, that no place. It's an important stage of the practice in order to dissolve this sense of self that we carry around with us unconsciously. And so as we sink more deeply into emptiness, into shunyata, I can speak for myself, in my own process of that evolution. Like I said, there have been times where it's just like, I don't care about the precepts. I don't care about how I'm acting or not acting, or who I should be or how I should be. All of that just feels extra. It feels like that head being put on top of another head, as many koans talk about. But when we come out of that, or even before, there is this sense of me. There is this sense of other. There is this awareness of how my actions affect other people in harmful ways, or in positive ways, or in neutral ways, and how my actions have a boomerang effect and affect me in positive, neutral, and negative ways. And so I'd like to talk about this idea of karma a little bit, and how it relates to our behavior, and how that relates to the precepts. What I want to say is my behavior and my karma are not separate from the process of awaking to true nature. And so, Ken Wilber talks about the vertical path of awakening, and then the horizontal work of our work in the world. And he's not coming from a dualistic place, but often to describe ideas, we have to speak from a dualistic place. So ultimately, these two things are connected. But sometimes but we can have these intense vertical experiences, where we experience emptiness, or we experience great compassion, and then we experience some immediate momentary disillusion of the self, and the whole world just feels so expansive. Our whole experience of life feels so expansive and beautiful and joyous. And in that moment, it's so wonderful, but eventually we come back to this body and things tighten down a little bit. That's been my experience, and I think I've heard many teachers talk about that. But there's this tightening that happens again, this narrowing that happens again. And then here we are with this body. And what we have with this body is a trained body. This body has been trained since before we were even born. So, for example, if our parent was a meth addict or an alcoholic or something like that, that fetus is going to be affected. And so there's a karmic effect of the parents' prenatal activity on the fetus. So once we're born, and depending on how we're born, there's what's called birth trauma. So how we're born, if we're born with our umbilical cord around our neck, or a breach of some kind, or in a really painful environment where we're taken away and we don't have that immediate contact with the mother or with a warm body. All of those little things have effects on how we turn out as human beings. So as a therapist, I'm very aware of these things, and I talk about this stuff with people on a daily basis and help them understand how they came to become them. Because often people are very confused. Like internally, we have this like, I know I'm a good person. I want to do good things. And then we end up doing these things that aren't so good sometimes and aren't so helpful for ourselves or others. So there's this confusion that happens. So all of these little events, some positive, some harmful, and some neutral, happen throughout our development as a human being. And psychologically speaking, it's research has shown that we pretty much are who we are by the age of 6 to 10 years old. We've already developed our emotional, like the emotional part of our brain, and the brainstem has developed largely by that time. And then it's the frontal lobes of the brain that continue development through about age 25. And so already how we've learned to deal with the world, our attachment styles to our loved ones, have already developed by the age of 6 to 10 years old. So here we are left with this karma from early in our life that we are walking around with and making largely unconscious decisions in our lives. So, nobody ever says, oh, I want to be an alcoholic when I grow up, or I want to be a meth addict, or I want to be a gambler and lose all my money, or I want to be a sex addict. Nobody says these things. Nobody says, I want to be a world dominating fascist leader. Like, I don't think Hitler, when he was a child, said that to himself, but people come to be out of this karmic behavioral conditioning that we're all set up with. And it's just a reality. I mean, and I will say that some people are really lucky. And with my clients, I say, hey, you know what? Some people get the golden spoon. They end up in this family that's just super loving and kind and compassionate, and they have wonderfully functioning executive functions in their prefrontal cortex. They got great training on how to manage emotions when they were kids, and they do really well in life. I mean, nobody has it perfect, right? Nobody has it perfect, but these people do really well. Other people, their mother was a crack addict, and they were born and taken immediately away, and were in foster home to foster home to foster home, and then were sexually abused, physically abused, and had, more traumas in the first 15 years of their life than 15 people combined, 15, healthy functioning people combined. And is that their fault? Is that their fault that they end up becoming an alcoholic? Because they're trying to manage the emotional impact of such an intense childhood. Anyway, it can be kind of grim, and I see a lot of really grim stuff. I have clients with some pretty severe issues that I work with on a daily basis, and it's not their fault. So anyway, we end up with this karma, and that karma does not mean that someone cannot experience emptiness. That can happen through LSD. It can happen through other psychedelics. It can happen through meditation. But when we come back to this body, we still have this body with all this karmic stuff. And yes, that experience of emptiness lightens things up a little bit. It loosens up the concreteness of karma, but those neural pathways are still there in the brain. They're still there. So, Hawkwind talked a great amount about the importance of post-Satori training and how post-Satori training is far more important and far more difficult than the post-Satori training. And so Satori, not Satori, but even just moving along our process of developing more and more access to emptiness, as that emptiness deepens, we still have this karmic behavioral, we still have this karmic internal conditioning that shows up as behaviors, and that we still have to pay attention to. And why? I say we have to pay attention to that. And the question is, why do we have to pay attention to that? So from an ultimate perspective or absolute perspective, there is no problem. And actually, it's a non-problem. It's not that there's no problem, it's a non-problem. So if for one moment you can just pause your thinking and just experience this reality as it is without any thoughts getting in the way or any interpretations. I just see a laptop, which doesn't, even that, I'm putting a label on it. So that's even not true absolute experience. There's just this, right? So in just this, everything that's happening is just happening as it is. It's not good, it's not bad, it's not harmful, it's not unharmful. Those are all just ideas and concepts and labels on experience. So from that angle, we all are fine how we are. And this was the first half of Shunryu Suzuki's well quoted line: "You are all perfect as you are." And then when we come back to our humanity and we have perceptions and we have thoughts and we have feelings, then Suzuki Roshi says, and you all need some work. And so when we come back to this body, if I do something that's harmful to someone else and I can see that harm and the pain that they're feeling, my karma comes back to me in form of shame, guilt, sadness. I might even start doing self-criticism, and my mind gets in there and starts shaming myself. So there's a connection that happens between us and others in this relative world, which, the relative and absolute are not separate from each other, but and the relative is just a delusion. But that connection between us and other beings happens in different ways, and we experience it in different ways. But one of the ways we experience it is this social biological system that we have. We have a feedback system. Our body is a feedback system. If I do something that's harmful, I get some kind of return. Now, they might shout at me or get angry at me, or I see that person crying, or they don't talk to me again for a week, or I get fired, or whatever. All of that is feedback coming back to me. But all of that external feedback shows up internally as feelings and thoughts. And those feelings and thoughts, if I don't attend to them, they go into my unconscious, they go on the shelf, and now I have this unexamined, unprocessed, unfelt, finished business of emotional karma that now I'm walking around the world with, that is absolutely influencing every single decision that I make. And it's impacting my future relationships. So the more karma we have in our life, negative karma that we have in our life, the more difficulty we're going to have in relationships, the more difficulty we're going to have keeping jobs, the more difficulty we're going to have having sustained spiritual happiness versus just worldly pleasurable happiness. Um, so in terms of our process of accessing emptiness and actually being able to be in that space of emptiness and live from that place, the less karma we're walking around with, negative karma, the less energetic, repressed, emotional energy that we have, the less weighed down I am by that, the less protections and defenses I need, and the more I can just be open and experience that openness. So let me say this from one slightly different angle, is that this self, this thing we call a self that gets in the way of realization and being able to sustain realization is simply, what we call the ego, is simply a set of protections and defense mechanisms that we've created through our life to keep us from feeling discomfort. So if I seek out meth or some kind of substance or gambling or any kind of compulsive behavior, I was an exercise addict, in my 20s. All these things are attempts at keeping me from feeling fear, sadness and loss and grief, shame, guilt, powerlessness, hurt, all the stuff that's left over from my childhood and my adult life. So when we sit on the cushion, our cushion time, our meditation time, and our practice time is really not just about calming the mind or finding peace. It's also about processing this karmic stuff that we're carrying around, this karmic emotional energy. And in that process, the more and more we burn through that, the less intense our thoughts are, because intensity of emotion directly relates to intensity of thought. Those two things have a direct correlation. And so for an untrained mind, as we train our mind more and more, we can drop the thought and come back to the feeling more directly. But to the untrained mind, intense thoughts have intense feelings, and intense feelings have intense thoughts, and most people just have access to the thoughts. They often don't even know what they're feeling in their body, but they're thinking, oh, that person, blah, 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 I'm going to do this. And so it's all this blame, overgeneralizing, catastrophizing, anxiety and worry, all of that kind of stuff shows up. That's all karmic disturbance. Anyway, so coming back to the precepts. So the precepts are the mirror for us to look at that karmic stuff. So if I'm talking about others' errors and faults, if I actually do that, karma will come back to me. It's not that karma might come back to me. Karma actually will come back to me, and it's happening right there in that moment. My drive to even do that is coming out of some kind of repressed emotional karma that I haven't processed yet. So when I use the precept as a koan, it's an opportunity for me to reflect on what is happening in my body that is ultimately keeping me from waking up deeper and deeper and deeper, and that is causing harm for others. So the more we are able to look at that and then process that emotional karma, the more peaceful and harmonious our internal world becomes. And when that becomes more peaceful, then our relationships outside of ourselves become more peaceful. And so there's this direct correlation between our inner work and what's happening outside of us. I also find the precepts to be a reflection of where I am on the path. And so I'll share a belief with you. I don't know how true it is or not, but it's something that seems to be true for me. Is that someone who's very, very deeply enlightened and who has really worked through lots and like, the majority of their really intense negative karma, they naturally live the precepts without even trying. And so I asked Roshi, Shishin Roshi this morning, hey, Roshi, I'm giving this talk on the precepts today. Anything you suggest or would want me to say? And he said that he said, yeah, I just, what comes to mind is that when Maizumi Roshi told me that he wanted me to reveal the precepts as myself, to reveal yourself as the precepts. And I'll just speak for myself that, um, some years ago, not that far back, throughout my life, I'll say that in all my practice, I find that my behavior has more and more and more become refined as my practice has developed over time, and as I have done therapy, as the teachers have poked the heck out of me when they see a behavioral pattern that I keep doing that's harmful. And all of those things have made me really look and process a lot of that stuff. And as I process my own stuff, the precepts don't seem that far away from me as they used to. Some of them still, some of them I hold as more current koans for myself than other ones. But then other times in my life, other ones have popped up where this one seemed not to be much of an issue. But as one comes down, it's almost like they both rise again. And then this one comes down, and then this one comes down, they both rise again. And so they seem big still, but they're pointing at things that may externally not seem so big. But in me, I'm still aware of something that I'm working on, like lying, or, to be a vegetarian or not to be a vegetarian, eat meat or not eat meat. Like, a koan for me right now, a big one is just, where does form fit into practice? Being a priest, recently I went through this phase for a period of time where I just, like, my robes and shaving my head just all felt like a Halloween costume, and it just felt like something I was putting on for a show a few times a week, and it had lost meaning for me. And why do we bow when we go into the zendo to a wooden piece of wood sitting up on a table? What's the point of all of that? So I was kind of in an empty place at the time, but also my focus had kind of shifted in other directions for a little while. And so I've come back around to that, and I've really been trying to understand what it means for me to be a priest. What does it mean to be ordained, and to support my teachers? At this day and age where, lay teachers are doing just, pretty much everything that ordained teachers are doing. So what is the point of priesthood? So that's been a koan for me. And so this idea of form, how that fits, where does Zen show up as form, has been a real koan for me recently, and it's been very powerful. And I've really started to connect to this sense of how important it is for me to hold this sense, this idea of actualizing harmony as a koan, as kind of like this ultimate koan for me with all my relationships, my work relationships, my intimate relationship, my son, his mother's, the Abbey residents here, the natural environment. What is harmony? What is not harmonious? And all of these are koans, and a koan is just something that we hold in the hand and look at from every side and feel it, think about it, feel it again, and just look. The one downside, the obvious downside to the precepts is that they can become this overlay where we judge ourselves, and where we create an internal conflict where one part of ourself, our inner disciplinarian, is fighting the other part of us, which is our, man, I just want to have sex. I just want to have fun. I just want to eat stuff. That looks cool. I want to buy that. Um, Screw that guy, Um, and this conflict can be happening internally. And if we set that up as this one versus the other, that's going to be a karmic residue that's going to create problems for us. We're going to judge ourselves. We're going to judge other people according to our standards. And then some part of us is going to get repressed. So if you're familiar with Freud's id and superego, it's the superego that holds on to the precepts like, I'll be such a good person if I follow all the precepts, and I'll be like the Buddha, and people will like me, and I'll like myself, and I'll be this super enlightened being, and everything will be wonderful, and I'll be happy to amazing amounts that I could never perceive. And then the other side, the id, is like, dang, she's hot. Man, I just want to eat 2 pizzas tonight. And, kind of that stuff I was saying before. It just wants pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. When those two are at odds with each other and there's not some kind of moderation, the id often loses out and gets repressed and comes out in these really sideways ways. Affairs, substance abuse, all kinds of different ways that the energy gets subverted. Freud talked about, I think, 8 to 10 defense mechanisms such as sublimation and displacement, things like that. When the id wins and the superego loses, then, life is exciting, it's fun, and boy, we build the karma really fast, the negative karma really fast. We just pile it on. When the superego loses, we can end up having a lot of eventual criticism for ourselves because we do all these things that are bad, that don't fit our values, and we end up criticizing ourselves for, being a bad person, and then that can create shame, guilt, and depression. Ultimately, every Buddhist practice that has been created and taught by the original Buddha and every teacher since, the intention is to relieve suffering. And so if we're doing a Buddhist practice that is not relieving suffering, then we're probably not doing it correctly, or we're approaching it from a way that isn't the original intention of how it was meant to be used. And so ultimately, is this precept, is the way that I'm using the precepts actually relieving suffering, or is it creating more for myself and other people around me? So with that, I will finish. Thank you all for listening.